Let's start. First of all, sorry for any inconvenience about all the hassle. There was a flood at the initial venue, but we managed to find another venue with dry feet. Dry feet, yeah. Yeah, we're very, very happy to see you here. We got a lot of inquiries for the event, and we knew that there's a lot of people who want to watch us through web streaming, so there's a lot of interest for this topic, seemingly, at the Commission and around the Commission. And this was organized by me and Haliki in cooperation with the European Environmental Bureau. And me and Haliki, we are representing the Blue Book Stagiaires Sustainability Committee.
Okay, and I'll explain about Slido. So I don't know if there's anyone watching us live. If there is, we hope it's working. If it's not working, then maybe you consider recording. But for those of us who are taking part here, or you can see us live. So basically, if you log on to sli.do, so sli.do, you can post your questions under the code 5160 here. You can see that. So if you have any questions, you can post them here, and hopefully we will have some questions coming up as well. Which is perfect. But we will be taking some questions from the audience as well. So, okay. And next, so here's Slido, and we have a Twitter hashtag. If you tweet, feel free to tweet. If you don't, then don't worry. PostGrowthEC is our Twitter hashtag. And now we're going to pass you on to Etienne Coyette from DG DevCo, C6 Sustainable Energy and Climate Change, who's going to give a little introduction as well. Okay, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I was happy to start with welcoming you to DevCo, but since the flooding, now we are in another setting. So, but still, welcome and happy to see you here. I'm working in DG DevCo in one of the thematic units dealing with sustainable energy and climate change. When we first had the initial contacts, obviously climate change is part of the important agenda items for the EU as a whole, and support to climate action in developing countries is also something that is of utmost importance. Now, just a few words about the concept of growth that is now the subject for the discussion today. Growth is obviously very closely linked to development, to the sustainable development process. I guess you are aware about the latest policy document that was issued regarding EU development cooperation. That is the the European Consensus on Development is organized around 5 Ps that are covered in the Agenda 2030. The 5 Ps are people, prosperity, planet, peace, and the 5th one is partnership, organizing partnerships. Obviously, growth is closely linked to the prosperity agenda. Excuse me. I had to rush on the bicycle, but growth is closely linked to the prosperity agenda. But if you look into the European Consensus for Development document, the concept of growth is appearing almost in every chapter of the document. What is important to see here is not only it is, yes, indeed, the basis for development cooperation, but when it appears in the document, it's never growth as such. It is always coming with a specific adjective to kind of fine-tune or better define the concept of growth that we try to achieve. In the document, you would find inclusive growth, sustainable development, etc. The idea here is that we aim, yes, indeed, to support growth in developing countries, but not any kind of growth, or certainly not at any cost. This means that when we talk about inclusive growth, this is the social aspect that is coming to the picture. If we talk about sustainable growth, this is more maybe the environmental and the climate dimension that are coming into the picture. It is true, we recognize that there may be some limitation or some negative elements coming together with growth, but on the other hand, it is also a key engine to improve the livelihoods and to better work to limit poverty. Poverty eradication is the main objective of EU development cooperation, but it is poverty eradication in the context of sustainable development. So this is a few words about the concept of growth that we work upon in DG DevCo and in EU development cooperation in general. Now a few more words about the climate change agenda. We are working a lot to support our partner countries for climate action. You are aware of the Paris Agreement and the fact that all parties had to develop their nationally determined contribution. So all the efforts we are pursuing now in DevCo is to support our partner countries to actually implement the nationally developed contributions. These contributions cover both the aspects of adaptation to climate change, which is the key challenge as regards climate change for the poorest developing countries, but also the concept of mitigation, limiting emissions. And there again, we are closely linked with the economic activities. Example of this, for example, is the new strategy on sustainable energy. One of the three objectives that are pursued is clearly contributing to limiting the emission of greenhouse gases. So this is a way to exemplify the type of work we are pursuing under the climate change agenda for developing countries. Whether this limiting emissions in developing countries is a key contribution to the overall effort, we can discuss a lot about this. Whether the EU is a contributor as well to the overall effort on climate change, well, the EU policies on climate change are considered as among the most advanced and the most progressive in the world. There was a question, a guiding question, is it sufficient so far? No, it is not sufficient, and that's why we support a lot the process under the climate negotiations. Well, this is a bit presentation. I think we will have a lot of interesting discussion here about the concept of growth, the type of indicator we can use to actually assess the progress regarding this very important objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Etienne. So let me, in the name of the European Environmental Bureau, the EB, welcome you to this lunch conference as well. And we're very grateful to the Infopoint and DevCo for hosting us, even though we had to move places. The EEB is Europe's largest network of citizens' environmental organizations, present here in Brussels since the 70s. So what do we want to discuss today? The idea behind this conference is really to bring together researchers and policymakers and researchers from what we feel is a growing field within economics, namely experts from ecological economics and in particular the question of degrowth, such as Federico De Maria and Professor Tom Bowler. And on the other side, policymakers and experts from the European institutions, not only the ones on the panel, but all of you in the audience working on, I assume, a very wide range of issues. We want to bridge this gap between research and policy over a very topical question, which we also feel is gaining political momentum at the moment. So in the phase of the various environmental, social and economic crises, is economic growth still the appropriate policy goal or the appropriate political priority for the EU? Or have economic and material growth cease to actually contribute to social well-being and to rather aggravate environmental pressures and health concerns for present and future generations? So what we want to do today is we want to leave behind a little bit the theories, we want to go beyond the analysis, we want to talk about policy options, maybe also about policy ideas which seem a little bit far away from political realities, but we definitely want to move beyond the analysis. So let me just briefly introduce the program. But before we go to the program, apart from putting your questions on Slido, we will also take questions directly from the audience. But do use the tool if you have your phones with you. There's also a poll. If you log into Slido, you will find a poll. And do participate to that one as well. And we will look at the results of the poll at the very end of the discussion. So who are our experts today? We will first have a video message to kick off the debate. So the video message delivered by Federico De Maria, who is a researcher at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. His video message is really to kick off the debate. That's still on the, let's say, the analysis part of things, from which we then want to move to the policy options. After Federico's message, we'll have a first round of reactions and questions to our experts on the panel before we then open the floor to you. So here at the panel we have next to me Fulvia Raffaelli, who heads the unit on clean technologies and products at DG Grow. Welcome. We have a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Philippe Lamberts, who is a co-chair of the group of the Greens. Then we have Professor Tom Bowder, who is the chair of the Department of Environment and Economics at the ULB here in Brussels. And Etienne Coyette from DG DevCo, team leader in the unit Sustainable Energy and Climate Change. Welcome and thanks for being available for this discussion. So then let's move to the video message from Federico. Okay, Fulvia, we would like to hear a reaction from you on whatever argument you want to pick from Federico's presentation. And then in particular, I would like to learn more about within your particular policy field, within DG Growth, how do you see has the discussion around growth changed recently, looking at these kind of analyses? Do you see any change in the debate? And if yes, what does the change look like, and what does that mean in terms of changing policies?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having this interesting discussion. Indeed, it's a very interesting issue. I think we share many of the underground, let's say, elements in De Maria videos, meaning that we are bounded, let's say, by the limits of our planet, and in defining our policy for the future, we have very clear limits and objectives in terms of preserving and improving the quality of our life on the planet. And this is clear. This is part of the Commission thinking already now for a very long time. All our policies are, let's say, underpinned by the sustainability concept already very long time away, not only from an environmental point of view, but from a social perspective, from international cooperation, from all different areas are really touched and embedded of the principles emerging from the sustainability. In the recent years and months, this has grown up. I mean, we are more aware than before of urgencies, and we, as an institution, we are really ambassadors of the need to do more in all these areas. And I think that this is very visible in most of the policies we've been adopting in the last years. Not only in terms of policies as such, but also in terms of definition of indicators, of definition of messages that we get across. The other important change in the last years is that we have a much more holistic approach than before. In the past, we had nice, interesting, and pioneer policies in many areas, meaning climate change or environmental or protection, many areas. Now we're looking at all these areas with a much more holistic approach. The introduction of life cycle content, life cycle analysis thinking all across the policies has really helped us to be more coherent in our approach, to be more consistent, and to try to align as far as possible all different policies. So we are definitely fully aware that growth will have to be, is not a concept, and that was said also at the very beginning, it's not a concept that as such. We're not looking for growth, as actually Federico was pointing at. We are always looking at growth as a tool to achieve objectives, being these objectives much broader than the growth itself. Inclusive, we want a Europe that we want a place to be, which is inclusive, which is balanced, which is respect for all the resources available, respect of all the persons that are here, not only in Europe, but also in the rest of the world. And I think this is very important. We don't need to focus only on Europe, but we need really to keep an eye on the global dimension. So, and then maybe we'll leave it open to the debate, but I think that we're not far away in terms of analysis, in terms of having a very clear understanding of what the limits are and the boundaries of the planets, and the obligation and the urgency we have to act in a way that respect those limits and integrate, let's say, the existence of those limits in our reflection. We are maybe somehow different in the instruments we have or we see in front of us and available to us today to achieve those objectives.
Oh, please, sorry. Thank you. I would just like to briefly react, and then we move on to the next expert. So just maybe to add one more question to that. I mean, obviously, there has been the move from, let's say, the growth paradigm to the paradigm of sustainable growth, innovative growth, inclusive growth, which is already a development. However, I do not yet see that this is really a paradigm shift away from, let's say, the broader growth principle. And even if the growth policies are focused on sustainable growth or innovative growth, inclusive growth, we cannot yet kind of face the challenge of the fact that even these growth patterns are not a solution to the problem of the growing use of resources, the continuing increase in emissions, etc. So can you say a little bit more about in how far we're not just moving from growth to sustainable growth, but also, let's say, an acknowledgement of maybe that we have reached a post-growth stage, or that we should reach the post-growth stage?
As I said, I think that for the time being, we continue to believe in the growth to be the main tools to achieve our objectives. I think that's important to understand that this is not only a word or what you said as a small shift. It is an enormous shift. This introduction of the sustainability concept in our policies is not only a semiotic change. It's really goes into the nature of the policies we've been doing in the last in Europe. Think only about our industrial policy. Then I'm coming to my field of expertise. Let's say only 2-3 years ago, there was a very strong reluctance from the Commission side to speak about industrial policy, because it was considered to be policies in favor of supporting the continuousness of old way of producing. So it was really seen as a policies not going in. Now, with the policy, the communication we had adopted in last September, you really see a change where actually the industry is not anymore the idea. The industrial policy is not anymore a means to support industry, but it's a way to use industry, to transform industry, to achieve our objectives in terms of reduction of resource use, in terms of reduction of emissions, in terms of inclusive and social acceptances of others. So it's not just a change in the name. It's really a change in the nature of the policies we are activating.
Thank you. Then let's move to Philippe Lambert, who is very engaged in the discussion about a post-growth scenario. Yesterday I was in another panel debate with members of parliament, and one of your colleagues said, oh, it's so easy to be green. I mean, meaning that it's so easy to have like high ideals as long as you don't have to implement them. Sorry?
Who was that?
I'll tell you afterwards.
No. That was said publicly, so it can be now.
It was an MEP from the EPP from Poland.
Oh.
But then I was thinking the reality is that it's actually not always that easy when we look at when you look at your constituencies, your voters, to whom you have to sell such ideas. I mean, we all know that people don't want to be told that they have to change their habits, that they have to change their lifestyles. So when we talk about how can we advance policies, they say post-growth or degrowth policies, we need support from citizens, we need support you need the support of the voters. There was one quite striking example during the last election campaign in Germany, when the Green Party put forward the proposal of a so-called Vegetarian Thursday as a very humble contribution to bringing our consumption patterns back to something more sustainable. And there was a public outcry. People were dismayed by the fact that politicians want to kind of tell them how to live their lives. So there was a huge backlash. The Greens lost their votes. Lost votes, not only due to this debate, but that was quite important. So telling people that less is more is quite difficult. So what is your take on that as a parliamentarian? How do you sell this agenda to your voters? Maybe as one example, you can refer to the question of jobs. People are concerned about jobs, and when they hear about degrowth or post-growth, the first reaction is like, but we need jobs. We need jobs for our young people in Europe. How can that be achieved with a post-growth scenario?
Yeah, where to start? Why is growth so popular with politicians? Because that is, of course, a key question. And by the way, just for your Polish friend, I don't know when he last worked in reality. I worked 22 years in the real economy. So saying that it's easy to be green, no, it's not easy, because we try to look reality in the eyes. And I think that a majority, not all, but a majority of politicians are not looking at reality. They live in a sort of fantasy world. Who believes here, by show of hands, that we should have science-based policies? Not everyone, but say the majority. Who of you has had at least one course in your education on economics? Who has had one course on thermodynamics? Okay. Now, there's a big difference between the two. So thermodynamics is a part of physics that deals with the way energy works. And of course, as you know, energy is at the core of the thing we call the economy. It's at the core of the thing. Now, there's a big difference between these two disciplines, economy and physics, is that one deals with deterministic processes, the other one is a social science. And that's not derogatory. It's much more difficult, I think, to do good economics than it is to do good physics. Now, the laws of physics are such that when the NASA launches Pioneer 10, a satellite, in 1972, it could predict where that satellite would be when it exited the solar system in 2003, 31 years down the road. It could. So the laws of physics are reliable enough, and of course here I'm talking about gravity. I'm not talking about thermodynamics. But the laws that we know are good enough to become predictive. The mainstream economists have been unable to see and predict the 2007-2008 crisis, are usually unable to predict with any degree of exactitude, growth 12 months from now. Of course, they would like you to believe that TTIP will generate 0.5% additional growth in 20 years' time. When you know on what the DSGE models are based, and well, I'm an engineer, as you can imagine, and I specialized in modeling. And modeling deterministic processes, and I modeled biochemical processes, is already difficult enough. But modeling society, give me a break. And if you do it, then basing your policies on such models that make as basic assumptions, basic, I'm not talking about advanced assumptions, but basic assumptions for the law of supply and demand is that one, we are all the same, we have the same utility function, all of us, that we are all rational, that we all know all the information, that we can process that information in a rational way to make rational choices, and by the way, that our preferences are homotetical. Yeah, you may deny this, but this is reality. These are the Sonnenschein, Mendel, and De Breu assumptions of supply and demand. And they make even the assumption that our preferences are homotetical to our income. To put it simply, that when you earn 1,000 euros a month, you spend 0.5% of your income on toilet paper, and that proportion remains the same when you earn 1 million a month. Right? You still spend 0.5% of your income on toilet paper. And making those assumptions allows you to give you the nice curves of supply and demand. And that is the basis of Economics 101. Now, I'm not denying that economics is a science, it's a social science. What I do resent is when economists make assumptions that are so removed from reality that they don't tell us anything about the world we're in. And that would be harmless if this were an academic exercise. The problem is that these theories are intending to give direction to policy making. And that's where it starts hurting. And again, that is the main difference that I may have with the Commission. As long as you put growth, economic GDP growth, that's what we are talking about. So measuring economic exchanges by monetary. In monetary ways, we are monitoring the economy, and we want this monetary mass to grow, right? Well, so far, and Federico said it, so far we've been unable to absolutely decouple that from material footprint. I'm not talking about climate or whatever, material footprint, so material impact. And you quickly realized, and it doesn't, if you feel, well, I don't know, we are maybe 120 people in this room, you add another 120, well, probably they will fit in, you add another 120, it's going to get really uncomfortable, but you can't add 2,000 people in this room, because it is physically measurable. It is not infinite. So there's limits to what you can do materially. And the laws of thermodynamics add to that there's limits of what you can do with energy. So yes, you can assume that energy supply to the planet is infinite. Because, well, the sun will burn for another 5 billion years. Yeah, okay. But you need to capture that energy, to transform it, and to use it. And that's where thermodynamics comes in. And the problem is, in order to do that, you need to spend energy, but you are bound by the laws of thermodynamics. So the quantity of energy that you can catch with the material supply that you have is limited. So unless economists can prove me that we can have monetary growth, so GDP growth, while reducing material impact, because that's what we need to do if we want to live on this planet, and there's several ways to do that. I mean, if you kill in a sustainable way 99% of the population, the ecological equation becomes much easier. That's much easier to solve. But this is not, of course, the view that we have as Greens, or compass is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every human being is born free, and all humans are equals in rights and in dignity. Basically, a good life for everyone. That should be our guiding star. Now, if you want to achieve that, with 11 billion people on this planet, and even with 7, well, there's a lot of things that need to change. And so denying that there are physical constraints, it's not just climate, it's material usage. You know, if you want to go forward, we should change the compass. If the compass is growth, then we are deluding ourselves. But we might say, okay, we take again the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration, and basically what we say, we are going to measure whether we progress on this, in this direction. Are we making sure that everyone, and that's the equality aspect, has a right to a good life? That there's enough material support to have a good life, because there's a material dimension to having a good life. But then, do we do that with respecting the physical limits of the planet? In other terms, I would not take GDP as the indicator. Neither positively, I want growth, or negatively, I want degrowth. Because it doesn't tell me whether we are progressing or not on Article 1. I would rather say, I would look at one indicator, which is our ecological footprint, or something that measures our impact on the planet. Are we reducing it in absolute terms, right? Because population will grow and is growing. So we need an absolute reduction, because already our ecological impact is more than what the planet can support, unless we kill people massively, and we don't want to do that. One indicator on ecological footprint, a second indicator on equality. And of course you want an indicator on material well-being, right? You need something to pilot your policies. But you have to stop looking at this GDP indicator. I'm not saying that it can't bring any useful information, but the politicians are addicted to it because it gives them the possibility of doing one thing, promising more to everyone. Once you start accepting that there's limits, then the D word becomes determinant, and that is the distribution word becomes determining. And of course, no politician likes to say, well, some of us are eating too much. And I'm not talking veggie. When 1% of the population on this planet has captured 82% of the wealth created last year, sorry, there's no way for everyone to get there. So yes, we need to say, guys, you are killing us. Remember Warren Buffett saying, the class struggle is still going on and the rich are winning it. And you see increasingly an implicit discourse, well, for those who can pay, there will be solutions, and let the other die.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. You've already guided the discussion towards the question of indicators, and I see that we have one question here on top, but we will come back to that question after we finish our first round of interventions. So, Tom, you're representing the academia, ecological economists here. You're the ones providing us with these kind of analyses. But the question here that we have started is, what can you do as a researcher to bridge that gap between your work and policymakers? What is your plan to deliver your message in a more effective way to the policymakers? And maybe as one example, you can also pick up of the question that I've asked before, the question on jobs. There's a general understanding, there's a clear correlation between growth and jobs. We need jobs. We have a massive problem with youth unemployment all across Europe. So what can you do as a researcher to provide more insight or more information to help us to advance with the post-growth agenda and taking away fears concerning the question of jobs?
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm academia, or science with a big S. I think a fundamental thing which I had the impression where the science part of the degrowth community still has to advance quite seriously is on the precision of language or the precision of analysis. You said we all share the analysis, and I heard by you that even within the Commission there's some sort of a big understanding or consensus on some parts of the analysis. with respect probably to the most easy parts of the thing, like climate change or biodiversity loss or these sort of things, you know, or poverty or reduction or the fact that we don't seriously advance with these sort of things. We share the analysis. The thing is that much of the discussion is focused today on GDP. You know, even the title of today, of the conference, of this gathering is, if we read it there, well-being beyond GDP growth. And it's a wrong question, basically. The wrong term there is GDP. GDP has absolutely no relevance. We don't do GDP. In Europe, we don't do much of GDP today. We do a couple of points of things. It's irrelevant. And in the whole discussion, GDP is partly also irrelevant. It's a message of something, but it's not the main point. The main point is that the growth of the economic activity, that's the problem. And whether that is generating GDP, more or less GDP, or whatever, is non-important. It's the growth of the economic activity which stimulates climate change, which stimulates biodiversity loss and that sort of impacts. And we have absolutely no way in decoupling seriously for the moment the growth of economic activity with the growth of impacts. We are doing quite well, at least in Europe, but it's non-sufficient because we're only a small part of the world. We're doing quite well in reducing, in a relative term, some of the impacts, but we all know also, I guess everybody in the room knows that it's absolutely not sufficient. Climate change is still there. We're going right into the wall if we continue like this. So we have to change seriously, structurally, the way we address these problems. And academia, or my colleagues, or myself, we need absolutely to get the things clear. It's not about GDP, it's about economic activity. And then in the end, for you, for the policy people, it's probably about, you know, what is degrowth, and try to get some precision into that. It's not necessarily degrowth of all economic activity. It's not degrowth of all jobs. It's not degrowth of that sort of things. No, it's degrowth of, as it has been said a couple of minutes ago, of, for instance, some industrial sectors. And at the European level, it's degrowth of some of the subsidizing schemes. You know, if we admit that climate change is real, it's absolutely idiotic to give subsidies to sub-regional or regional airports. It's just idiotic. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not. You don't need to be a big analytical sort of skill guy to understand that. It's just idiotic. I do think also maybe for your particular agenda or for your units or for your DG, the European model or the European idea is built on increase. You know, increase of member countries, increase of happy people, increase of innovation, increase of, yeah, some say GDP or growth or whatever. But it's the idea of increase, you know, progressing by increase. There's probably other ways to do prosperities without increasing, without this idea of increasing. And a couple of the environmental and social problems we face today actually ask to us very, very impressively that we need to switch from the increase idea to the decrease idea. We need, and the European Commission in particular, I think, needs to shut down part of its book on innovation. Innovation is cool. I like it. Everybody has a smartphone, including myself. But the real question today is not the one of innovation, it's the one of exnovation. How do we get out of some of the systems? It's not how do we create electric cars, how do we create autonomous car driving or that sort of stuff. It's really how do we shut down the nuclear sector? How do we shut down energy produced by fossil fuels? And we have economics, and the European Commission has, to my understanding at least, or my observation, and I only know a very small amount of what happens at the Commission, they don't produce analysis or expertise or skills or scientific projects even on how to do that. There's no subsidy schemes, for instance, on SMEs which try to exnovate from certain sectors. It doesn't exist, or hardly exists. But we know we need to exnovate from industrial agriculture, we need to exnovate from 99% of the energy production, we need to exnovate from the mobility sort of stuff we do. We need to just disinvest and degrow, if you want to use that term, degrow these activities. and reinvent other activities, other prosperities, other ways of doing. And these things of doing, they can be economic in nature. And if in the end they generate GDP, well, they will generate GDP. That's not much of a problem. If they generate jobs, well, they will generate jobs. If they don't generate jobs, it's not much of a problem either. We are currently living with quite a lot of unemployment, and people don't suicide themselves massively because of that. Societies can start to redefine what a job is, what work is in society. And there's a lot of people working on that, on the theoretical, conceptual, philosophical side, moral side, since hundreds of years. What is a worthwhile life for society? We all in the room, including myself, we define that a lot through work, through our jobs. But you know exactly that's not only part of the story. And if we run from one meeting to the other, it's not that which fulfills our lives, or only partly, yeah. So I think the main message is we need to, as academics, we need to get very precise in terms of analysis. We need also to be very precise and seriously advanced in developing tools. It has been said that there is an issue with modelization, economic modelization, and I share that. Especially the degrowth community has for long slept over that sort of challenge. I share the idea that the current macroeconomic modelizers have great difficulties in constructing something valuable in terms of prediction. There are some trajectories which can be constructed, or scenarios or whatever, but in terms of prediction, it's not what they can achieve. The thing is also that the macroeconomic modeler, I know, mainstream macroeconomic modeler, their tools are not useful for the questions which we need to address. Their models are made with the idea that the output variable, so what comes out of the computer, out of the printer, that's points of GDP. Yeah? If you want to ask the computer, the same model, what happens if by any chance we would fall into a consensus that we should stop GDP, go to a 0 GDP, or I don't know, -2 GDP, these computers, they cannot do that. You cannot just inverse the computers, put it on its head and it will do the other operations. It simply doesn't do. It cannot switch output with input variables. So what we need is totally new macroeconomic modeling exercises and modeling tools. Now, if you know that the current modeling tools have been developed over 30 years, that it's a huge task to do it. It's a 20, if we are really lucky and have huge amount of money and skills, in maybe 15 or 10-year sort of exercise. And currently in the world, there's 2.5, 3 teams working on that sort of modeling exercises to do macroeconomic modeling with respect to degrowth questions. What happens if we have zero growth to, for instance, financing public services? And these are very important questions, which the current modeling tools cannot reply adequately.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I think your intervention or your contribution is hopefully provoking a lot of questions from the audience. So get ready. We have one more contribution before we open to the floor. So please do prepare your questions. Etienne, we've already heard from you how your policy field or how development cooperation relates to the growth paradigm. But just to end that round of first intervention, I would like to ask you a question related to policy coherence. So a lot of the DEFCO funded projects, or a lot of the work that the DEFCO is doing is related to mitigating the consequences of climate change in some of the poorest communities around the world. You yourself have been very active in the negotiations of the Paris Agreement, and now we're in a situation where most of the member states do not deliver enough on their promises. So what does that mean for the policy coherence between the macroeconomic objectives that we have domestically or internally and the policy objectives of external action, and especially the policy objectives related to the climate change agenda? How do you relate to that?
That's a very, very important and difficult question. I'm working on development cooperation, and indeed we work in supporting partner countries in meeting their commitments or their engagement, their pledges under the climate convention, the Paris Agreement, but also for the Agenda 2030. Just one precision, the last numbers show that we are actually supporting more, contributing more to adaptation efforts than to mitigation. So it's also a very important message to towards our partners, because their key priority is still adaptation. Now it's true, we try to also support the mitigation efforts, and I mentioned the energy strategy for development cooperation, international cooperation. One of the three objectives is actually the contribution. So therefore, we only support the development of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Now, the policy coherence question is very important, and it is true that whatever the EU does, given its size and its place in the international arena, has an impact on the situation of developing countries, and in particular it is the case for the climate and energy policies. We have seen examples in these policies where the impact was positive, but I recognize there was also examples where the impact was not that positive, and the EU has been able to actually fine-tune or improve the policies in order to reduce this impact. The question on the member states meeting or not their objective or their pledges under the climate convention, it is of course not very good news, but it's also to be seen in a longer term or a mid-term context, and we have to meet these commitments by 2018, 2020, and there are different dates or deadlines set up under the climate convention. But still, the EU is one of the most progressive or advanced group of countries globally showing the way to climate action. We, of course, can discuss about this decoupling of CO2 emission from economic growth, and the fact that part of it is also externalized, but it's also true that we are able to move towards more renewable energy. There is a new policy from the Commission on circular economy. These are very important contributions to this overall objective. Is it enough? Certainly not, and that's why also the Paris Agreement foresees a regular revision or review of the targets and the commitments. So as DEFCO, part of the external cooperation in the EU, we try to bring our modest contribution to these global efforts. But it is true as well that globally this concept of economic growth and GDP growth is very often even sometimes the key or the only criteria when we start the policy dialogue with our partner countries. So this is also a challenge that we have to face, and almost systematically in the policy dialogue, the EU is bringing, when we meet our government partners, is bringing the climate change agenda, but not only that, the environmental sustainability, the equality and social inclusion characteristics, and this is also part of.
We have many different indicators we'll be developing in different areas, from the resource efficiency score, etc. So I think it is not the way we're doing. GDP is one of the indicators we're using, is not the only one. That is part of our change. The part of the change we saw in the policies at the European level in the last, and in that we are also. And then let me say a word on the pedagogy, because I think that it's important also to understand that, and I think it was common across the panel, that those changes we're talking about are long-term, medium, long-term objectives. And we need to gain experience and to be very pedagogic and progressive in the changing we're bringing about. In our policies, you can find a lot of different ins to change. ideas to take into consideration more. Let me take only the circular economy very briefly and then I pass it on. But on circular economy, we have for the first time a very solid part on consumption. And this is about really changing the path of consumption. It's bringing elements like durability, reparability into the policy making. Are new elements, this one that touch upon may not have direct impact tomorrow in terms of creation of jobs, but they are definitely elements that would create conditions for the people, for the consumers, for the one we are, to think about those considerations on the longer term. So I would refrain from saying that the GDP is the kind of the line and the main principle we follow. So there's a lot of that's going on, and again, we need to see it in the medium long term.
Yeah. So I don't know the Thai law, but of course the sufficiency principle is one of the key elements. So sufficiency is basically making sure that everyone has its basic needs covered. And indeed, that is what is key. Again, if you take Article 1 as the reference, a good life for everyone, well, that has a number of requirements, and we need these requirements to be fulfilled. And that's the starting point. So that provides the rock bottom. And then I would say, again, in a spirit of not maximization, but optimization under constraints, which should be the political equation, the ecological footprint and the degree of inequality should provide two binding constraints. So we are not willing to allow our total absolute ecological footprint to go beyond this, and we are not willing inequality to go beyond that. And actually the two are linked. It's not as if they are independent. And basically the sufficiency principle provides you the floor, and the other two, the walls and the ceiling. And that defines the operating environment. That's the way we should think. And again, sorry, it's an engineering way of looking at things, and don't trust the engineer for everything, and never. But listen to them every once in a while. Listen to them every once in a while. Because, well, they remind us of some of these constraints under which we need to operate. So, yes, I think it would be a good principle. If I may add something on jobs, because you had questioned me on that. Our grandparents were working to the tune of, what, 70 hours a week? More? I don't know. Now, we do as if there is, or how should I say, what is the purpose of work? Finding a meaning to your life, basically by contributing to the common good of society. And precisely why? Because, well, work is normally useful to serve a good life for everyone. If it's not that, then I don't know what's the use of work. So working needs to deliver as output a better life for at least some people, right? Otherwise, it has no meaning. Now, who says that you need, as a quantity of work, the macro quantity of work needed to allow everyone to live a good life? How come that we consider that that quantity is precisely defined by the number of people in working age, times 38 hours a week, or 35, okay, times 48 weeks a year, times 47 years for a career. And that, by chance, is the quantity of work that is needed. So we start with drawing the size of the box, and now we want to fill it. We need to find jobs to that tune. What if the work that is needed is only half of that? What if? And the key question again becomes one of distribution. How can we make sure that the work, so I do not believe that work is going to disappear, absolutely not. But probably the how should I say, the share it will take of our 24 hours will go down. Now, we must make sure that we do not live in a distributional model where you have the haves and the have-nots. You have to make sure that the distribution of work and the thing that goes with it, which is income, is much, again, allows everyone to live a fulfilling life. And part of a fulfilling life is the ability to contribute to society, but also the ability to receive an income for it.
Okay,
but that changes the perspective.
Can we see, yeah, do you have, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Do you also want to comment on the Thai government's proposal, or shall we take more questions from the floor? Yeah, maybe we can see who has questions from the floor. Let's take 3 questions. If you just can we take one more microphone here for the questions? 3 questions. Just briefly say who you are and to whom you direct your questions. Let's start here in the front, and then you, and then one more. Yes, please.
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I am Barbara Bashigalupi.
We can hear.
I am Barbara Bashigalupi from the European.
Try this one. Sorry.
Hello, I am Barbara Bashigalupi from the European Commission, DG Environment. I have yes a comment and 2 questions on the panel for the panel. Whoever is welcome to reply. There are increasing multiple crises, and the World Economic Forum has recently identified environmental risks as the top pressing global concerns. And these are climate change, pollution, resource depletion, and the loss of biodiversity. Now the questions are, in order to tackle this crisis, do you think that the EU should use top-level indicators beyond GDP to make decisions on priority setting and the EU funding? And the second question is if you could provide possible candidate indicators to make this happen. Thank you.
John Philippe Cornelis, I'm working at the University of Louvain-la-Neuve in anthropology, and I want to thank you for this analysis, but as anthropologist I would share the advice of Philippe Lambert's. I believe that the human being is not reliable and you can't really know how he will react. Let's say just one example for those holidays of February. You know that it was a jump of plus 40% of the airplane flights to long countries, plus 40. So you can imagine that, of course, we here are aware what we have to do, but there are others who are behaving like children. It's not my concern. I don't care. And I would say if we can do a good analysis about what Philippe Lambert proposed, we are working with 4 labyrinths of constraints. He was talking about the laws of nature. They are eternal and we can manage with them and we can make
Can we come to the question, please?
Yes, and my question is, shouldn't we try another model, another anthropological model where we work, for instance, at lowering the CO2 and COH4, because trusting the human beings is not a solution.
Thank you. And then we have one more question from Anne in the back.
Hi, I'm Anne Rom of Seas at Risk. Federico in his presentation mentioned that the circular economy can never, the aim of a circular economy can't be achieved in the type of economy we have. And of course, in essence, the circular economy concept that the EU strives for is basically a growth agenda and an efficiency agenda. And of course, if you keep growing things, this circle becomes bigger and bigger and inflates itself, and therefore can never be sustainable either. So my question maybe to the entire panel is the EU on the wrong path by promoting the circular economy as the key solution to everything? Of course, business loves it because it's a growth agenda, but clearly it's not a path that leads to sustainable development.
Thank you. So maybe we can go into a first round of reactions to the questions. Who wants to start? Maybe the question on the last question we just heard on the circular economy being the objective of the circular economy and the results of prioritizing the circular economy.
Maybe if I may, on circular economy, so yes, the efficiency agenda leads to the rebound effect, and so if we are trying to increase efficiency, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing, we have to find ways to curb the rebound effect. And there again, we come to this notion of absolute limits that we don't want to cross. Can we have policies that are basically predicated on a paradigm of optimizing under constraints? But then we need to set a constraint. Cap and trade for CO2 is in theory a sort of optimization under constraint, and the market mechanism being the optimization mechanism. The problem is that the constraint is set so far away from anything relevant that actually does not exist. There's no constraint. Everything is for free, which is why the carbon price is close to zero. Well, it's irrelevant, I mean, for investment decisions. But this principle of saying, okay, we have a carbon budget, we have a resource budget, we have a biodiversity budget, we cannot go beyond that, and within those limits, we try to be more efficient, more circular. That makes sense. Now, as to the circularity, Olivier, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, at the moment, the European economy is a metabolism that eats 7 gigatons of stuff every year, and of those 7 gigatons, I'm not mistaken, 1 gigaton is circular. The other 6 are not. And of course, a big part of the 6 gigatons is energy, stuff we burn. And of course, if you no longer burn anything for energy, then you become much more circular. So yes, being more circular makes sense to me. So we should, again, not delude ourselves. It cannot be an excuse to then continue growth. It's, again, about absolute reduction and not relative reduction in ecological impact. And just about circularity, I invite you to visit Umicore, who recycled these things. Oh, yeah. Right? You have to understand that you might say, so there's loads of rare metals here. And yes, you can recycle some of them. The point is, the law of thermodynamics, again, say that you have to choose, before you start the process of recycling, you need to identify which parts of this thing you want to recuperate. Because the rest is lost in the process. So 100% recycling of this is a physical impossibility. So dreaming of a fully circular economy is just a pipe dream, but a dangerous one. So yes, but again, that is no excuse to say, then let's be inefficient. Let's be not circular. No, I think the efficiency agenda is meaningful as long as we optimize under constraints.
Yes, I think we never said the circular economy is the solution to everything. This is again is a part of the puzzle. Is a part of the several policies that driving let's say driving the development, the economic development in a certain direction. I fully agree that we've never been fully circular, and it doesn't make sense in many cases. It doesn't make sense to be circular. It's better to think about different solutions. So it is a part of the puzzle. Designing at the beginning, I agree with you, is a crucial part. So I think having that, this is something on which we're putting a lot of pressure on, is that you cannot come with the circularity aspect only at the end of the process. You need to think of that ahead when you are planning not only your product, but when you're planning and designing your production process at the beginning, and even looking at the supply chain, so at the material you are taking into the matter. So when I was saying, I was referring to the life cycle approach, that was what I had in mind, is that we need really to look at all these processes in a holistic way, from the beginning to the end. And I also agree with you that energy needs to be, we cannot look only at the material part in insulation to it. We need to look at the material part together in close relation with the energy side, because again, that's the plastic matter. I mean, is where we use so many energy to recycle as plastic materials that, frankly speaking, it doesn't make sense. So the two aspects, material and energy, has to be looked in one goal with a very holistic approach. You can and you need to have those instruments on which we're working very nicely. I mean, Barbara is an expert on that in terms of environmental footprint, in terms of definition of criteria and indicators, really to drive the decision-making process of the producers, or the ones, or the designers, to be able to take into consideration all those arguments, all these different elements from the beginning. So, again, not solution, not the solution, a part of the puzzle that driving, I think, is the same, in the right direction, including the part on consumption/education, which I think remain crucial, because we cannot do that alone. I mean, whoever we are, Commission, member states, entrepreneurs, never alone. On this we need really a paradigm shift that includes citizens, and in first place citizens, workers, all this part of the people needs to be on board. And to do so, we really need to be pedagogic and to invest in education in the medium long term.
Thank you. Maybe, Tom, I can ask you to respond to the question that we heard from the representative from DG Environment. We have already kind of started to discuss the question of better indicators. But maybe you want to give us some more ideas of what would be alternative ways of measuring how successful we are. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I worked for 20 years on alternative indicators, so I'm starting to be fed up with that sort of thing. I start to switch. I have the freedom to switch to other problems. I do share this comment that I mean saying that there's a focus on one single indicator and that would be GDP is actually not true. That's not how it happens. I'm not a policymaker, obviously, but I sort of bump into some of them from time to time, and I know it's not that they are not that stupid. The thing is, on the other hand, that there are quite a lot of stupid people around, and while some of them write the bigger parts of the newspapers, for instance, and there you clearly, if you look at the newspapers, or at least the ones I read, there's probably others. There's a strong focus on GDP as an indicator, at least in the economic pages. Or sometimes it's job creations or something like that, or employment rates or something. And obviously that's not what we call to start deciding on what should disappear in this world, or in Europe, or in parts of, not in Poland maybe, but in parts of Europe, in the more intelligent parts of Europe, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not a civil servant, so I can't say this. But we need to start investing into developing indicators for the stuff which you like to see disappear, because we are not very good in measuring these things, and we don't have indicators for that. We have indicators. There's the index for the circularity, which is very imperfect, I have the impression. But there are no indicators which help us to understand which sectors are very far away from circularity. And I do think these indicators are very important.
Okay, we slowly have to wrap up. I'm afraid I can't take another question because we're already past 2 o'clock, but I hope that you may want to exchange after we close the discussion bilaterally. So just to kind of wrap up, some of the researchers, for instance, Federico has provided us with his video message. They are also trying to translate their more, let's say, theoretic analysis into policy ideas, and he has posted some here, and I think we have actually touched upon some of them. So he's, just to read out what he has shared here, like the policy ideas are basically the direction that we have discussed, new ideas of how to structure our work and job life, work sharing, policies on work sharing, policies related to a basic income, but maybe also a maximum income. Obviously, the green tax reform. Then we have discussed about abolishment of the use of GDP. I think there was quite some consensus here that GDP is definitely not the only indicator, and maybe not the most important one on progress. And then finally, he's suggesting a debt audit as well. So I think we have seen that there is some common ground between all of those who have contributed to continue this discussion. And I would also like to wrap up our session by informing you about what's next. So the discussion doesn't stop here. As I've said before, we have seen that there's quite some political momentum around these questions. So just to inform you what is going to happen later this year, there will be a 3-day conference in the European Parliament. Philippe Lamberts is one of the MEPs who is organizing this, but I understand there's a very broad coalition of parliamentarians across the political groups, and the event is also endorsed by the President of the Parliament. And the 3-day conference is going to start with 1 day focusing more on the academia, input from the researchers, and then 2 more days including the policymakers.
And the 4th day at the trade unions.
Okay, great. So even 1 more stakeholder included. Then in October, so just 1 month later, under the Austrian presidency, there will be an event in Vienna, a large conference on growth in transition. So also the next presidency is endorsing this topic. And then in November, we understand DG Environment is going to have an event on Beyond GDP. So it looks like we will have a lot of further opportunities this year to discuss these issues. And maybe also link up the policy ideas and policy discussions to the elections next year, and to see how these topics can be discussed in the election campaigns. So let me thank all of you for coming for this lunchtime conference, for your input and for your openness to discuss these questions, and also to the audience. Yes? Sorry? Yeah, and we also would like to, we still have to look at the survey results, if people have actually, oh thank you, if people have contributed to the poll. So we put up this poll asking you what should be the tagline for the post-2020 Commission, and with 61%, the most popular tagline is people and planet. The second one is good life for all, and then jobs and well-being, jobs and growth, and others are at the, let's say, lower end. So people and planet. Okay, so thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon.